All right. And welcome back to the First and Goal podcast. My name is Lewis, and next to me is my beautiful co host, Laraib. And we are super excited to cover the first week of football in the 2021, 2022, 2023 NFL season. We're so excited to get into all the games, our overreactions, our hot takes. But before we do that, we want to let you know something very special and new coming to the program. Laraib, you want to get into that?
Yes, sir. We are finally on Spotify, guys. I know, having to pull up YouTube on your phone while you're driving probably isn't the most convenient thing. So now we're on Spotify for you guys. If you don't want to look at our beautiful faces, then you can always hear us through Spotify. The links for that will be on all our socials and down below in the comment section for you guys.
Yeah, so make sure we have a link tree now with all of our different socials. So if you want to follow us on any of those, just click the link tree. It'll bring up all of our socials, and you can follow us on all platforms. That would make us very happy. So, Laura, you want to go ahead and get into our weekly predictions? So
Ooh.
we did our episode last week, and just to give you a hint for my audio listeners, you can't see this, but we're showing our results from last week, in which I won the week 10-7. My lock, the New Orleans Saints, they survived. I'll say that. They got out of the Falcons game. They were dead. They were legitimately dead, but they came back like Jon Snow in Game of Thrones from the dead and destroyed the Dirty Birds, which I love to see. Other notable games that we split on. Your upset of the week was New England, and I said Miami. Both of our upsets did not hit. You said New England would win. I said Las Vegas would win, and their matchups, they both lost. But the difference was my Washington Commanders, which took command in their house, beating the Jacksonville Jaguars, little kitties. They could not get the job done. But overall, it was a pretty close week. We missed a lot of games, but that's the nature of week one. Crazy things happen. And what did you take away from our predictions?
Well, your Saints barely survived, but my Kansas City Chiefs thrived in week one. Um, Another one of the teams that we were split on was Dallas versus Tampa Bay, and we just saw how poorly that Cowboys offense was, even with Dak Prescott out there only completing 48% of his passes, and then we saw the finger injury. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But that was one of those games that I was kind of upset on because the Cowboys offense really was not clicking how a lot of us saw, that they should be early on in the season. And then also, I picked the Rams. In the first game of the season, and we saw how that turned out. Matt Stafford really didn't look like himself. Maybe that elbow is really getting to him, and that offensive line play was really really bad by them. And the Buffalo defense, you got to give credit where it's due. They were on him all night, and so it's just week one. Lewis, you got me here, even though we haven't talked about the Seahawks game. We haven't put the points in for that yet, but it wouldn't have mattered. But you got me week one. But I'm gearing up for week two. It's going to be a good year for me this year.
Yeah, and just so y'all know, right before we were filming this right before the Monday Night Football game, so we will not be covering that in today's episode. We both picked uh,
Big
Denver
Denver.
to win that game. So we'll see what happens in that, and we might hit on it in our next episode. But I want to focus more on yesterday's games, and for our listeners, Sunday's games, where we have some overreactions. And so we're going to bring back our favorite segment from 2 seasons ago. It is called Cap or No Cap, in which we will discuss which hot takes, which overreactions that we've heard throughout the day about these Sunday games are in fact true or not true. Cap meaning true, no cap meaning true, cap meaning that's false. Stop spreading it, just in case you're not in with the lingo nowadays. But Laurab, I have my first question for you, my good sir. Cap or no cap? After losing 23-7 and having a poor offensive showing, the Green Bay Packers are going to miss the playoffs in the NFC.
Mr. Butler, with every fiber in my being, I want to say no cap, but I have to say cap on this one. All right, we're going to talk about this game a little bit later on, and we're going to see, the Vikings. I 100% agree that the Vikings are going to end up winning that division. Okay, but for the Packers, we saw Aaron Rodgers was getting hammered all afternoon, but they were missing two of their key offensive tackles, right? no David Bakhtiari, and no Elton Jennings. And, that's going to be a huge fact for them going forward when we know they're going to have to ground and pound the ball a lot more, right? Also, they're missing Alan Lazard, the wide receiver that Aaron Rodgers has the most connection with. He was out for that game, and so obviously this looks like a really bad loss for them. And without Devontae Adams, they're obviously their offense is going to come down a tier. But we saw this happen to the Packers last year, so we can't overreact and say, "Oh, a terrible blowout loss for them. The season's over." I agree they're going to be worse than last year. But we can't rule them out just yet with back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers at the helm.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also going to say Cap just because I think in a normal, really strong year in the NFC, we might be having a better conversation about this. But just because of how weak some of the other NFC teams have been showing so far, that I think they will figure it out. This is still Aaron Rodgers. It's still Matt LaFleur, who have won 13 games every single season for the last 3 years. And we saw last year they had a really disappointing showing in week 1 against the Saints, in which they also got humiliated. But this is a big deal for them. And if this question was more about the division, then I would say I don't think they can win the division at this point. And I predicted them to lose the division, notably to the Vikings. And this is a game that it wasn't a random opponent. It wasn't in a weird situation like last year playing in Jacksonville in that heat, against the Saints. It was just a really weird atmosphere, and Aaron Rodgers got off his game. But you can understand it was just a wipe that one and move on. But this is against a divisional opponent in their building who you're familiar with. They're familiar with you, but they have a brand new coaching staff, new pieces on defense, including Zadarius Smith, who you know best because he was on your team last year. So you know that he would want to get up for this game in particular, but you let him walk because you didn't want to pay him. And what did he do? Well, he made your life a living hell as Aaron Rodgers got sacked 7 times and was in constant pressure. Now, yes, you can say the receivers weren't in the right rhythm and they were losing a lot of mojo, but Rodgers, that's a lot on you. You didn't show up to the voluntary workouts, and they're voluntary. You don't have to. But you make $50 million. You were the highest paid quarterback in the NFL this season. You need to be there. You need to be putting in these reps with these young guys, giving them confidence instead of eye rolling and giving attitude and saying, why me? This offense is awful. I'm the victim, blah, blah, blah. No. Tom Brady working with these guys. Get on the same page. I think as the season goes forward, he's going to find success with these guys once they get reps and they start getting confidence in the offensive system. But right now, I do not think they're the best team in that division. But because of the nature of the NFC, they will still make the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And the big thing that you're saying is the nature of the NFC this season, right? We saw the Rams get embarrassed, the 49ers get embarrassed, the Cardinals get embarrassed. Some of those big hitter teams that we thought would be going, or they are going to be going for that 7th seed, 6th seed. They just haven't looked that good, right? You can talk about the Saints. They end up winning that game, but obviously they're struggling a little bit. And so it's going to be tight. And I obviously think they're going to be able to sneak in with the connection between the quarterback and head coach. But moving on to another cap or no cap, Mr. Butler, I have a question for you, sir. Dallas will finish last in the NFC East. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, as much, I'm gonna say no cap. I really do because here's the scenario. They're gonna be missing Dak Prescott, so he injured his hand. He's going to be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And you might say, well, okay, that's, he's going to be back. They're at least not going to finish last in the NFC East. Well, I want to ask you, Laraib, and I'll let you get to this point. But last night's game, even with Dak Prescott at quarterback, that team, that offense looked awful. Now, yes, you're missing Michael Gallup, you're missing Jalen Tolbert, but those are your 2nd and 3rd tier receivers, which do take pressure off of a guy like CeeDee Lamb, who definitely is a receiver who needs a guy to take pressure off because he could just not separate when the defense was focused on him. But there were a lot of problems offensively with how bad this offensive line looked. They could just not run the ball at all. And then they were getting constant pressure. And yes, Tampa has a really good defense, probably one of the best defensive fronts they're going to face all season. But it just how inept they looked was a cause for concern. And we're going to get to some of these other NFC East teams that we thought, oh, they're the bottom of the barrel. They're going to finish last. Well, this division, it's always in flux. Teams get better. Teams get worse. We saw the Giants and Commanders have huge wins yesterday. And a lot of people's pick to win the division, the Eagles, also got away with a win, a great offensive showing, not as well defensively. But there's a lot of cause for concern with this Cowboys team because you have a tough stretch of games going forward. You play the Cincinnati Bengals next week, and we'll talk about that game in our next episode. But you have games against the Rams, the Packers, you have games against the Eagles in your next upcoming stretch, where without Dak Prescott, it's basically impossible to win these games. And then some of those fringe games against your division, like the Commanders and the Giants, even those games are toss ups now. So I really do not think that it's a lot of cap saying they'll miss. They'll be at the bottom of the NFC East.
Yeah, but one bright spot that they did show last night was their defense. They held Tom Brady to only 19 points. We saw whenever they got down into the money zone, the red zone, they only scored 1 touchdown, right? And so that's going to be a bright spot for them to lean on throughout the season while Dak Prescott is gone. Playing that good defensive football like they played last year with leading the NFL in takeaways, they have to continue that success going into this year. They lost some guys like Randy Gregory, but they're gonna have to make up for it. They played really well last night, in my opinion, against that Tampa Bay offense, who looked really scary with Fournette going for 100 yards, Julio Jones looking like his former self out there. And so you have to be proud of the defensive unit, but just like you're saying, to be well in this division, you're gonna need a quarterback to keep up with. Saquon Barkley. We saw what he did the other day. We saw Carson Wentz for 4 touchdowns, but also 2 picks as well. But
Jahan Dotson, 2 TDs.
Yeah, so that the division is going to be a lot more competitive than we were initially thinking. A lot of people were initially thinking to start the season, and so without Dak Prescott, it's going to be on the defense. And are they going to be able to hold up? We'll see throughout this season with Cooper Rush at quarterback or Ben DiNucci at quarterback. It's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, and then you talk about the defense being a bright spot. I think the bright spot was Micah Parsons showing that he is an elite pass rusher, and then on multiple third downs in the red zone, he showed that he could just finish a drive completely, and he's just so athletic, so unstoppable that he himself could keep them in a lot of these games. But if that offense is going to put up a showing like they did last night, then it's going to be a tough stretch for them. But, Laraib, keeping it into the NFC East, I want to ask you a question about the New York Football Giants and specifically Brian Daboll, who got his first win at Tennessee yesterday and pulled off let's just say, a very risky stunt, going for 2 instead of the tie at the end of the game, succeeding, and then ultimately winning that game. Is Brian Daboll your favorite to win Coach of the Year this season?
Yes, I think he is. A lot of people did not see that game from yesterday where they played the Titans. It wasn't one of those marquee afternoon games. And we had the Chiefs and the Cardinals and the Raiders and the Chargers. But this game, I was watching it. I couldn't witness what I was believing. That front 7 for the Giants was stopping Derrick Henry, only held him to 85 rush yards. And if we go back to if they played this game 2 years ago, he's going for 202 touchdowns. But they held him to no touchdowns, only 85 yards. And that defense was stellar. Okay. And then on the other side, you look at Daniel Jones, he had 1 pick and it was really costly. And what Brian Daboll did after the pick? He went up to the sideline and he started yelling at Daniel Jones in his face. He wasn't, beating around the bush. He wasn't doing any of that other crap. He went up right to him and he was telling him, this is a big deal, right? You could have cost us a game. And so I really like his coaching style. I really like how they played, right? The Titans, they use their own formula against him, running the ball with Saquon Barkley 30 times, keeping the ball away from Ryan Tannehill. They really controlled the offensive game for themselves. And, and then going for 2, right? That was one of the most gustiest calls I've ever seen, going for 2 and getting it. And this is a really inspiring win for this team. And like we were saying, the NFC really, some of the Giants that we thought were going to be leading this playoff race really might not be. And so, they could maybe sneak in as a 7 seed, 6 seed, and who knows what this team can do, right? Wan'Dale Robinson was out for that game, but Kadarius Toney, we saw some flashes from him. Even Kenny Golladay was getting a little bit more involved. So this team, we saw what they're doing in the locker room after the win. Their head coach is dancing with them, playing the music, rapping along with them. So I feel like they've really built a really nice chemistry with this team. And moving forward, I think Daboll, Coach of the Year, in my opinion, and this team maybe a sneaky playoff contender.
I don't hate that pick. I would say that my biggest coaching takeaway of one of the first-year head coaches, because that's usually who this award's going to, at least in recent years, is that first-year head coach who kind of makes a splash, or just a coach who hasn't succeeded much, kind of making that jump. I like that Brian Daboll pick, but I don't buy this Giants team unless Saquon is who we think he is. I don't buy this team entirely enough for them to be like a playoff S team. I think that's what it'll take for him to win Coach of the Year. I will say Mike McDaniels with the Dolphins. I think it shows a lot by we know the record of Bill Belichick versus rookie head coaches and his dominance over certain players and certain inexperienced coaches. I think it was a lot for him, and he made a gutsy call on 4th and 7 in that New England game to go for it with the game kind of on like it was a close game at this point. 4th and 7, Tua hits Jalen Waddle for a touchdown and was a huge point in that game. And their defense played amazing. I just really like what he brings to this team and brings to this offense. Tua was looking sharp yesterday. So I think he right now is my favorite, but I really don't hate the Brian Daboll pick. I think the Giants are going to be a very fun team this year. And like we said in the last segment, I think they're not going to finish last in the NFC East.
Yeah, I mean, great team, great or not, maybe not a great team, but they got some nice pieces on their team. But moving
Absolutely.
on, Lewis, let me ask you, cap or no cap? The Kansas City Chiefs have the best offense in the NFL.
It's no cap, and it really shouldn't have been in question the entire offseason. We love to glorify and anoint the new. What's new in this world? Our attention spans have become so quick nowadays. Now we just want to move on and move on and move on. Guys, Patrick Mahomes is not even at his prime yet. I mean, he's still in the early years, but he's been so good and so consistent ever since he's been the starter in Kansas City that we just like, yeah, well, that's Patrick Mahomes. Let's move on. He lost Tyreek Hill. This offense is nowhere. But he showed the world on Sunday that you can't just look by him. You have to pay attention because he's going to put on a show. And now say what you will, that Cardinals defense wasn't stopping many teams last week, but I think for them to send that message to the entire NFL while you're paying attention to your Joe Burrows, Justin Herberts, Josh Allen's, there's been one constant in the NFL for the past 5 years, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs being the best offense in the NFL, no matter who is catching the ball, running the ball, or blocking. As long as 15 is under center, they're going to be the best offense in the NFL.
Let me ask you one more question, Mr. Butler. Do you think this offense looked better with or without Tyreek Hill?
I think it's too early to tell, honestly. I know I want to give that hot take answer, but against this Cardinals defense, like I said, which was porous, I think the big thing here is, are they a worse offense from last season? I think obviously losing Tyreek Hill is going to make you a worse unit. But are they a worse offense from last season? I say no, because that offensive line showed me a lot yesterday. And I liked him being able to spread the ball out. He was very, very sharp between the 20s with just moving the ball, getting those first downs, spreading the ball around. 5 different Chiefs caught touchdowns yesterday, and he hit 9 different receivers with passes. I mean, that's just stellar offensive play calling by Andy Reid, and that's just him knowing to get guys involved. Juju had 50 yards, MDS had 30 yards, Sky Moore had 40 yards. He was just spreading it around, and Kelsey's always going to be there for him as that safety blanket. And Clyde also showed a lot in the passing game. So I just think him with a competent offensive line and all these capable weapons, it makes this offense harder to guard because it's less predictable. Obviously, Tyreek has that game-breaking, game-changing speed that it's so hard to guard. But I think a lot of weapons, I'm not saying it's necessarily better, but it makes this defense a lot harder to predict, which can be better.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about it in our first episode for this season. We said even with the loss of Tyreek Hill, the group of receivers that they brought in, right, is overall better than just having Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman from last season, right? When Patrick Mahomes is able to spread the ball around to many different guys, it makes his offense almost unstoppable. And then we saw Clyde yesterday. He maybe he hasn't lived up to standards of what they drafted him to be, but yesterday with his 2 touchdown performance, we've seen him, sprinkle him into the offense with that, reverse screen and that jet sweep coming across. And so, they're able to incorporate all these different pieces into their offense. And so, they're playing the Chargers Thursday night. We'll get to that in a little bit. And their offense just looks really, really scary, Lewis.
Yeah, all right. So I got another question for you. Cap or no cap? We saw, speaking of one of the best offenses, one of the worst and most surprising offensive outings was from the San Francisco 49ers as Trey Lance was really not getting it done. Yes, the weather was really bad in Chicago, but still outplayed by rookie or second-year quarterback Justin Fields, and I would say a worse quarterbacking situation. So, with Jimmy Garoppolo still in that locker room, cap or no cap, Trey Lance will be replaced by Jimmy G by week 7.
I'm gonna say no cap on this one, Mr. Butler. All right, we look at Trey Lance. I know it was really rainy yesterday in Chicago, flash floods. It was literally swimming pools on the field, right? But you just saw the way he stood in that pocket yesterday. He looked really shaky to me. A lot of his passes were off. He looked really nervous. They said in the broadcast, he's played in more snow games than he has in rain games his entire career. And so, maybe he's just not built for this situation, right? But no, we talked about it earlier. This NFC is wide open. So if you're the 49ers and you think, Garoppolo has taken us that far, he's taken us to the Super Bowl. Maybe, if this is our year where the NFC is down, the Packers, maybe not, maybe they're not those guys. The Rams, maybe they're not those guys. If this 49ers team can be like, you know what, Trey Lance, get your ass on the bench. Garoppolo, you're back in. We have a chance this season, doing what we did last year, doing what we did the 2 years ago, to make it to the Super Bowl, make a deep playoff run. If we have that shot with Jimmy Garoppolo, then why not take it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, yeah, you're right. This is a Super Bowl roster, and you didn't lose Jimmy Grant or Jimmy Garoppolo. And that was, I mean, you thought you could trade him and potentially get something back and just get off that salary. But he's back on your roster with a backup salary. So you don't have to worry about not being able to sign or re-sign guys like Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, and a lot of these Debo Samuels. You don't have to get rid of them now because you don't have that huge Jimmy Garoppolo paycheck on your roster. But at the same time, you know how far Jimmy Garoppolo can take a roster like this. He can take this roster to the Super Bowl. Whereas Trey Lance, you don't know how far he can take you. And by any indication, this previous game is something that gives you pause for concern. Now, I don't want to make a judgment too quickly, but let me give you their. I said week 7 for a reason because let me give you their next 6 games. So they host the Seahawks at home, then they go to Denver, host the Rams, and go to Carolina and go to Atlanta. So you assume next week he has a better game against the Seahawks. You would assume that just because of the conditions and the opponent is not that great. But then you get 2 back-to-back Broncos and Rams. Those are huge tests for him. And I think if he plays bad against the Broncos, there's going to be a huge question mark. And if he plays bad against the Rams as well, that might be the nail in the coffin. But then you play the Panthers and the Falcons. And you're probably thinking, Lewis, why did you choose these 2 games? I mean, they're obviously going to win, right? Well, we thought the same thing about the Bears. If they can't beat the Panthers and the Falcons, yes, on the road, but still, then I don't think it's a question you bring Jimmy in. Because with this roster, this is a Super Bowl roster, and the players in this locker room know that Jimmy Garoppolo can get them that far. They don't know about Trey Lance, so there's going to be a lot of tension within the building. That's why I didn't think it was a good idea. If you believed in Trey Lance, if you thought he was the guy, you needed to at least cut Jimmy Garoppolo because you needed to have that faith in them, and clearly they do not. So I think he's on a tight leash, and I don't think he makes it past week 7, Rob.
Very, very interesting for that 49ers team, Lewis. But let's move on to our last cap or no cap. Let me ask you, Mr. Butler, cap or no cap, the Cincinnati Bengals will miss the playoffs.
Cap. I mean, they're not going to miss the playoffs. I think this game told me more things. Now, obviously, if you're the Bengals, you want to win this game. Losing the game is awful, but this gives me signs that this Bengals team can come back and they could be a really good team this year. They committed 5 turnovers, missed an extra point, 2 field goals from one of the best kickers in the league, and they lost by 3 in overtime. That's not that bad. For all extensive purposes, they won this game. They had this game won after Joe Burrow had an awful day with 4 interceptions and a lost fumble. He still had them in position at the end of the game through the game-tying touchdown and had an extra point to win it, which was missed because a long snapper got injured and there were problems with the kicking game all day. So I am not giving up on this team. I still don't think they're going to win this division. I still like the Ravens to win this division, as you heard in last week's podcast. But at the same time, this defense is still really talented. I liked a lot what I saw from this defense against, yes, it's Mitch Trubisky, but that offense still has a lot of weapons, and I think they held up really well. And offensive lines, especially new units, yes, you can say you brought in new offensive line talent. It's like, oh, the talent's better. The offensive line's going to be better. Well, offensive lines need chemistry. They need to play games together. And they need to get into a rhythm in order to figure things out. So I think as the season goes on, and T. Higgins, he also went down in this game with a concussion. But as the season goes on and this offensive line gets more and more reps with each other, they're going to figure out and play a lot better together with Joe Burrow commanding them. So I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs, Laraib. I think this is an overreaction.
Yeah, for sure. Top to bottom, they have one of the best rosters in, the entire NFL. And so, I really like what I saw out of Joe Mixon the other day. Of course, Jamar Chase is going to be Jamar Chase. We saw what he had some amazing catches in that game. And, when you're playing against that Steelers front seven, they're going to demolish anybody, no matter their offensive line. TJ Watt went out towards the end of the game, torn pec, he might be gone for a little while, but, still, that Steelers defense is nothing to be messed with. And so exactly what you're saying, you can have 5 turnovers and then still, you can technically, like you're saying, technically they won the game, but not really. But it's performances like that where like you don't give up, right? You have 5 turnovers, you say, we're going to pack it in. That's it. We're done. But, they kept on battling and battling and battling. And, it came down to some kicking at the end. They didn't get it done. But still, I think I have to agree with you. That's cap that they're going to miss the playoffs, especially with that type of roster that they have.
Yeah, and then I also want to say real quick before we move on, I think as a coach, and I heard Sean Payton talking about this earlier today, he said you hate to lose any game in the NFL because there's only so many opportunities to get a win. But a loss in week 1 can be the best thing for your team because it's all those teaching points and it's all these things that you can take back to your team and you can coach up. And especially in a game like this where it went to overtime, there's so many things that your team did wrong to lead you to this point. All the expectations were for you to win this game handily, as they were favored by 6.5 points. But for them to hang in there, bring this game to overtime, and it was little things, not little, obviously, because it cost them, but things like special teams that can be fixed easily. I think it's a good way for you to motivate and keep your players hungry throughout the season. So I think a lot of teams who lost in week 1, don't be surprised, and we'll talk about this on Thursday's podcast. Don't be surprised if a lot of these teams come back with a vengeance and have a big showing next week. But speaking of next week, Laraib, we're going to go ahead and look ahead to this Thursday night football game with the Chiefs and the Chargers, a huge game. If I'm not mistaken, this game is in Kansas City.
Yes, it is. And some quick notes about the players in this game. Keenan Allen, his availability is in question for this game. We saw he went down in the game against the Raiders. And Mike Williams and those other guys really stepped up against that Raiders defense. But we'll see if they can do it once again this week against the Chiefs. So they held Kyler Murray to only 21 points this past weekend. And so Justin Herbert, let's see if he has some more magic in his bag to pull out against his Chiefs defense. And then that offense is going to be able to keep up with Patrick Mahomes' 5 touchdowns from last week. We saw this Chargers defense. I was really, really proud of what they did this past weekend, right? You look at the score for this game, a really tight game. I would have said, last season they probably lose this game, right? All those, all that bad karma that they had, all that bad juju, those really tight, close games. You have some really bad coaching, something goes wrong, and they end up losing one of those type of games, right? But they pull it out this week. Devonta Adams goes for 120, but that's without their starting corner and J.C. Jackson not being out there. But I really like how they played last week. But it's gonna be a different juggernaut this week against Patrick Mahomes. We saw this amazing performance that he had, and it's gonna be exciting to watch which one of these offenses can put up more points this week.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I think this is probably the most entertaining game of the week. And like you said, this Chargers defense really impressed me last Sunday with their ability to get to the quarterback, namely that just Khalil Mack's presence on the field I know it was a revenge game for him going up against his former team, but I think him alongside Joey Bosa, they just work so well together, and there's no way you can double team both of them. That it makes it so hard for an offense to game plan when you have two dominant edge rushers like that. So I think the Chiefs might have some problems in this game dealing with those two. But overall, this Chiefs offense, I think at home in Kansas City and their home debut, they're going to get up for this game. They know the understanding is against a divisional opponent. They don't lose a lot of these divisional games at home. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know they are very dominant in the past 5 years in these type of games. So my faith is with the Chiefs. The number at 3.5, I still like the Chiefs to cover as well. I think it's going to be an exciting game though, and I can't wait to see what these two quarterbacks put up for us.
Well, speaking of the a -3.5 favor of the Kansas City Chiefs, ding ding ding, this will be my upset of the week. I'm gonna
Really?
pick my Chargers. I'm gonna be a man of my word, put my money where my mouth is. My boy Jay Herbo, he's gonna have a fantastic season. Chargers are finally gonna make the playoffs this year. So, it's these divisional games, right? It's always the divisional games between two divisional opponents. You never know what's gonna happen in these type of games. Like you're saying, the track record really doesn't favor me at all. History is not in my favor, but I gotta put my money on Jay Herbo. Give me the Chargers in this one. It's gonna be a fun game, really fun game on Thursday night. Even with no Keenan Allen, give me the Chargers 31-28.
And I'm going to go with the Chiefs 34-30 covering. I think it's one of the best games, and it sucks that it's on Thursday, but at least it's the only game on, so it's going to be a hell of a show, I hope. And that'll do it for today's episode. We have a Seahawks game to catch. So I just want to remind you that since we're now on Spotify, thank you for listening this far. If you got here, please make sure you go through all of our like, comment, subscribe on this video, share it to all your friends. We're really trying to get the views out there on Spotify so we can just give you more and more content and better quality content every single week, every single episode. So thank you for your support, and we're excited to look forward to some football.
All right. Yep. Thank you guys for watching. Catch y'all later.
Peace.